Welcome to another episode of The Thriving Misfits. I'm your host, Fyiona Yong, and in this episode, I'm honored to have Caleb Low, the founder of the #Ripple Effect Method, join us to share a deeply personal and inspiring story. Known in Singapore as the brand coach, Caleb had built a reputation for transforming leaders and entrepreneurs by helping them amplify their personal brands to create lasting ripple effects in their industries. But life threw Caleb a curveball when he made the bold decision to move to Malaysia to support his wife's career. Leaving behind his well-established network and reputation, Caleb had to start from scratch in Kuala Lumpur. In this episode, Caleb opens up about the challenges of reinventing himself in a new market, navigating feelings of invisibility, and rebuilding his brand from the ground up. He'll share the mindset, strategies, and lessons that have helped him embrace this new chapter while staying true to his vision of helping others succeed. So welcome to the show, Caleb.
Hey, Fiona. Thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. So let's kick it off with a fun question. So when you moved to KL and you went from being the brand coach to who's that guy, what was the first thing you did to prove yourself that you still got it?
So before I answer that, I must say, Fiona, you've got an amazing podcast voice. I can tell clearly you've been in this game for a long run. Beautiful podcast voice. And to answer your question, the first thing I did to prove myself that I still got it was I bought myself a car. I'm going to leave it there at the moment. I'll explain more in the subsequent Q&As. I'm just going to leave the audience hanging there a little bit.
All right. I know. I mean, you're from Singapore, so I kind of know where you're trying to get at. But let's hear from you a little bit more later. So you moved to Malaysia to support your wife's career. And this is also something that I really appreciate about my husband. If people don't know, I actually relocated from Germany to Hong Kong in 2010 for my job. And my husband was willing to give up his life in Germany. Of course, he also had this ambition to explore his Asian heritage. But I think this is such a big step to make, especially as a guy. So I feel that it's such a beautiful act of inclusion in itself. So my husband has been a true ally without him even knowing about that. So how has this decision shaped your perspective on partnership and also balance in your relationship?
Well, I think this is a very powerful question to start with first. And if I were to be very honest, I don't think it's the answer would be as noble. I think everybody makes the best decision based on the circumstance that they have. I think my wife and I, we are very fortunate in a few circumstances. I think firstly, we are dinks, so we had a dual income, no kids, right? That makes it a lot easier to make these adventures, right? That most people, when they're settled down, it will be a far more difficult consideration to make to move overseas. I think the second consideration to make is that it really helped that my business moved online thanks to COVID, right? So I think before COVID, a typical day of work would involve coaching, which means I got to go to my WeWork office, pay a buckload of money just to book a room for 2 hours, right? My coachee comes late, so I got to extend another hour or so, right? And that's how a coaching session had to be done, right? Because of COVID, not just coaching, but even training engagements became online as well. So I would say that this really helped me in making a decision to move overseas. There was a level of sacrifice, but I think, thank goodness, the sacrifice required was not as great as it would have been for a typical guy who may have to quit his job, quit his career, put a career on hold just to move for the wife. So I would say that this was a very big part of the reason why we could make a move, unique to our circumstance. But I think more importantly, it's during this process alone that I understood after 11 years of marriage what the concept of teamwork means. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Fiona. Maybe please add on if it resonates with you. But very often when a husband and wife just lives in their own bubble, right? It's very common for them to end up being two very good friends who end up staying together, right? And very often it's only when they have kids where the kids become that natural common goal that forces the husband and wife to become a team. So I think my wife and I, for the first 10 years of our marriage, we had the luxury of just being in our own two-world bubble. No real major decisions to make. Housing mortgage is very comfortable, right? We have more than enough for our day-to-day. So it's only when we had to make a move, then it involved things like selling our house at what price? Where do we buy our next home to stay invested in the Singapore real estate market, right? And do we buy a cheaper place that lowers our liabilities, or do we go bold, go aggressive, and upgrade to a more expensive home that has capital appreciation? Then um, our financial philosophies then came into clash, right? Then when it came to moving to Kuala Lumpur, where do we stay? What kind of life do we want for ourselves? So it was this transition that forced us to have to work towards a common goal for the first time, because it was just her building her career, me building my career, coming back, having a nice glass of wine, enjoy dates, live together. Next morning, go out, fight our own battles, come back, rinse and repeat. Right. So it was really this transition, having to make really key decisions for the first time in a decade, that it forced us to review what teamwork really was. Yeah. So I would say that it was this transition that made us appreciate the fact that our opinions matter. We have different philosophies, but at the end of the day, it's about making a decision that we both can agree and be satisfied with without being bitter. Right. So I would say that was really the realization of what teamwork was in a marriage.
I mean, that's such a beautiful thing that you mentioned. I mean, I have a 2-year-old son, and me and my husband, we're together for 20 years now. So we're celebrating our relationship anniversary in March, 20 years and 12 years of marriage.
Amazing.
So very similar to you.
Amazing. Yeah.
But I must say, to be honest, I know, and I've heard of some couples wanting to have a child, and then they feel like that's the glue that holds them together. But I feel that you really need to be a team before you even think about welcoming a child into your home, into your lives, because that's actually a make or break. And we've realized that we've been together for 18 years. It's just the two of us. We've been, such a great team. We've gone through adversities together, having lost two pregnancies, and of course, moving from Europe all the way to Asia, such a huge cultural shock, right? Not being with family, and then the pandemic as well. I think all of these things, all of these adversities actually help us to grow together as a team, what you mentioned. I think you really need to be clear about, you need to be a team already before even welcoming a child, because that really requires you to work together. And I think if you're only waiting to have a child and then establish that team spirit, it's almost a little bit too late.
I think life has a way of teaching us or revealing to us where we're lacking. I think for me, it was this having to make that first major decision after 10 years of marriage, that it reviewed this gap, right? Okay, we need to be more as a team. So I think some people have a kid and then they realize, okay, this kid is revealing where I need to grow in our marriage. So I think life is a way of teaching us, revealing to us in its own time.
Oh, yes, for sure. Now, I mean, society, they love the traditional roles, right? But you broke the mold. Did it feel empowering to you? Was it intimidating, or maybe kind of a bit of both?
Wow. So I believe that for my case, we broke the mold in some way, and yet we didn't. So I believe that we talk about you're a thought leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And the first one, diversity, does review that there are really differences between many people, whether it's at a generic level by race, generic level by gender. And I am a firm believer that men and women at a high level, we are built very differently, right? Whether it's our hormones, our genetic makeup, our physicality, we're just built very different. And I think that one thing that we can't deny, right, that how men see their career is very different overall compared to how a woman sees their career. And very often we see that guys, our identity is very tied to the role we play in the outside world, the battles that we fight, the victories that we have. Our identities are unusually tightly intertwined in a way that most women may not be as such. And I think when it comes to men typically breaking the mold, right, to follow the wife overseas, right, it is that sacrifice of something that is so natural and so instinctive to them, right? And I think in my circle where I followed my wife, I've met surprisingly many other husbands who followed their husbands over. Some of them are still running their business in Singapore while their wife takes on a role in KL.
Mhm.
Another interestingly, recently, the husband put a hold on his career, pause, right, from the corporate world to follow his wife into KL. And wow, that is, to me, for a guy, is the ultimate sacrifice. For me, I found myself in between, where my business in Singapore is already self-running, right? So for me, the transition uh, would not be as stuck or as heavy compared to, say, putting my career on complete hold just to move overseas. I think during this period of time, where I foresaw certain dangers is when me being in Singapore, me being in KL, running my business out from Singapore online, will only take up 10-15% of my time, right? And other than that, maybe I might go back to Singapore once a month, spend maybe 8 to 11 days there, and my time there will be very busy. But beyond that, the rest of my time in Kuala Lumpur, the biggest danger I saw was the fear of having too much free time and not knowing what to do with it, right? And I think, the pain men can be when you remove purpose from their lives. I think a lot of retired men, um,
Yes.
their wives encourage them to get back into the workforce, right? And my fear was me moving to KL, finding myself in a space where I have not yet built a community. I'm a complete nobody in this city, and there is no daily reason to get out of the house, right? And that was my biggest fear. And I had to ask myself this very tough question: is that whatever I do, I need to find my own reason to come to KL. Because if I don't do that, I might find myself in a position where I say, hey, look, dear, I dropped everything for you. And the
Mm.
moment I mouth those words, it's the beginning of the end of a marriage. So I told myself very on that if I were to make this move, I need to come over on my own terms,
Yeah.
not just come from a I'm sacrificing and it's all
Yeah.
about empowering my wife and don't worry about me. I had to make sure that I had my own reason,
Yeah.
selfish and selfless reasons for coming over, so that it protects the marriage as a whole. I think I'm grateful that my business is self-running in Singapore, so I'm not worried about having to be in Singapore to
Mm.
build business, get more leads. Right? It is self-running, right? So it's just operating it over Zoom in a different country, right? So that was the reason why I was personally at my level of sacrifice. I was okay with moving out of Singapore and follow my wife to a different country.
I think that's really important
Yeah.
mindset to have, right? Because otherwise you're going to have resentment towards your
Yes.
wife.
Yeah.
I think this is so important. And I think that's great that you have found this, that mindset in order for you to really step into this kind of role with confidence and also grace.
Yes, I
So,
think yeah. I think on top of that, right? I think we also looked at statistics, and I think we
hmm,
can't overlook data that has happened in real life. And if you look at the global statistics of spouse moving for the other spouse, uh, a majority of them are the women who move for the husband's career,
yeah.
right? And the times when it's happened inversely, the data shows that the divorce rates in these scenarios are very high, unusually high. Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, it's not so much about just being a very noble narrative headliner, right? Man moves overseas, but we had to come up with very real realities that the data indicates so and so. We need to honor the data and have a good discussion of how can we make it work in spite of the data. So I think it's very important, because these decisions, when we move it just because it sounds so good, it could kill your marriage if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great
Yeah.
advice. Now, when you moved to KL and you found yourself maybe unrecognized in the market where you were once the brand coach, how did you handle the feelings of being maybe a little bit invisible and then you have to start from scratch? Did your ego ever throw a little tantrum when people in KL didn't know who you were? And also, how did you manage to calm it down, calm your ego down?
I would say the ego did throw just a little bit of just a teeny bit of a tantrum. Just a teeny bit. No, it was a lot of tantrum. I think
Mm,
you can prepare yourself as much, right? nice narrative. I even wrote a post on LinkedIn that went viral about me as a husband moving over to KL for my wife's career. Right, I think it had over close to 300,000 impressions. I think 2,000 over likes, and only had 1,500 followers back then. So it went viral, right? And it moved a lot of people. But the reality is often not as beautiful. It requires a lot of realization before you can write such a wonderful post that moves people, right? And the reality is this, all right, is experiencing the immediate contrast of being very well known in my business in Singapore, to the point whereby I don't have to network anymore. When I go to networking events, the reality is people come to me and say, "Oh, are you that Caleb on online that I know that has so and so? Oh, you're that Caleb. Oh, nice to meet you," right? And that's the whole point of building a personal brand, right? It breaks down the walls. People see your authority from the get go. But when I moved to KL, it was a role reversal. So my wife's role in KL immediately makes her a VVIP in this country, right? From ministers, civil servants, all the way to the datos and tan sris in KL, they want to meet her, right? So when I go for these events, I think it's very natural that I'm often as just seen as the accompanying husband, right? And I think honestly, deep down, cross my heart to God, right? Part of me does feel like, hey, do you know who I am? Like you're just looking past me like I'm a nobody. Do you know who I am? In Singapore, these are my clients. This is my income. I'm not just any husband who dropped everything. Hello, right? So the heart was screaming this out, right? But the mouth just stayed silent, right? And that was the first adjustment that I had to make, right? Being around network who now saw my wife as who gravitated towards my wife, and I was just that invisible guy, right? The second part was when I chose to go out there and build my own business community, go for networking events, go for this and that. And I realized a second difficulty is that because I was unknown in KL, even in the business sector, I felt that I had to prove myself a lot harder in a way that I didn't have to in Singapore. And it's very ironic because I teach personal branding, I teach about identity. A large part is about networking as well, right? But being in an environment where people look past me from the get-go, I felt I had to over introduce myself. We felt so unnatural. We felt overselling. And after a while, I'm like, no, I shouldn't be overselling myself, you know. So after a while, I kind of felt lost during networking events as well. So it was in these two scenarios where I began to ask myself, did I make a wrong decision coming over? Right? I thought people should be, you know, honoring me the way I was honored in Singapore. You know, I worked so hard to build my identity up in Singapore, only to move to a country just from scratch. Like I don't need this. So these were the very honest internal narratives that were flying through my head, and I'll be lying to say that it was very easy to manage them. It was very difficult because of a sudden contrast. I think if I was starting from scratch, if I was a nobody in Singapore, it would probably have been easier being a nobody in KL, but that certain contrast was a cognitive adjustment. Yeah, it was a cognitive adjustment. So that was the level of difficulty that I personally faced in KL.
Right, right. I
Yeah.
mean, it resonates with me as well. I
Mm.
mean, I've been living, growing my business in Hong Kong for the past 7 years, and then I moved here 2 years ago. But I think for me, not being recognized on the streets, right? It's still fine because at that stage, I became a mother. I had other priorities in life, other focus areas, so I didn't really mind too much about that. And then
Yeah.
I think because it was so gradual for me, it was still fine. So I can imagine for you, it's just like being thrown into cold waters. Now you talk a lot about personal branding. You're helping your clients, you know, create that personal brand. You talk about the ripple effect method. Sounds really powerful. What inspired you to create that? And also, how do you help? How do you use it to help others also make waves in their industries?
Right. So the ripple effect method was born out of me having a track record of failure in my life. You know, when we literally, if you plot my entire life through a data point, right? So an objective analysis of the data, you would find that at at Six Sigma observational level, I have a track record of failure. Caleb is a failure. So, for example, when I was in school, I was so skinny that and it was re-emphasized by my friends who had to remind me that I was skinny every single day. That tarnished my own relationship with my own body, and I hated the way I looked. So how skinny was I? My arms were stick thin. My chest were concave, right? It wasn't even flat, right? It was a minus A cup, right? A negative A cup, right? And just going to the beach, being topless in a swimming pool, I hated that, right? So, and you know how when someone is develops an insecurity, we tend, guys especially, we tend to react in one of two ways. The first way is we tend to be more shy, more reserved. We hide away from the limelight. The other way is the direct opposite, where we double down, right? We try to be a know-it-all, trying to prove that you're right, because when you're right, people want to be around you, right? So that was the route that I chose, right? And I developed this ego that became very fragile, all because I needed validation, because I hated my body, right? This insecurity did not serve me well as I evolved later on in life. When I served my national service, my 2 years of mandatory military service in Singapore, I had a command position. So I was leading a section of 6 men. And just before a major exercise, I was called to my superior's office. And he says, Caleb, we need to talk. For some reason, the men are not listening to you. So we have to remove you from command. Someone else will replace you, right? And just like that, I was demoted. And the thing about being in military service in Singapore is that when you are demoted, you can't just change to a new company. You can't just change to a new campus. You have to stay with the same group of people for the entire 2 years, right? So I was seen as by my peers, my subordinates, and my superiors as the guy who got demoted, right? And that was my identity across the entire 2 years, right? Then when I graduated, I couldn't find a job for 2 years as well. So I was jobless around. My wife was killing it in corporate, right? And every day I was just jumping from internship to internship. Eventually found a job. I was the worst performer for 4.5 years in corporate, right? So naturally, I'm a creative person, right, by nature. This job required me to be analytical, right? It required the use of Excel, churning out hundreds of thousands of data points, right? And as best as I could train myself to be, I would just merely be barely competent in this skill set. My colleagues didn't have to put in so much effort, and they were just thriving through, right? So when you are being paid about the same, right, as your peers, but the work throughput and output is a stark difference, you can understand why your colleagues will have some level of resentment, right? And as a result, understandably so, I had a target on my back. I was subject of workplace bully, but in some ways, I did deserve it. It took me 4.5 years to realize that 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 the pain of being in corporate was too painful. So I left to start my own business. 2 years of business, my total revenue was $1,000 over 2 years. That means each year I had a total of $500 a year of revenue, right? And that up to that point in time, if you really map out my life, and the day I was born to my early 30s in my career, I've not had any evidence of success. And the whole point of the ripple effect stems from this, was that in spite of all these negative data points, right, through God's grace, through understanding a lot of myself deeper, I managed to turn that around to within a year, bring in a 6-figure income in my business, followed by multiple 6 figures up to $500,000 revenue. And the growth of this revenue did not come from striving, did not come from running paid ads and being the best marketer out there. It came from a space where, without trying, leads just came to me beyond abundance, right? I was not searching for leads. Leads just came. And it required me to compile my business revenue at the end of year two. I realized, how did $500,000 just come into my business when I did not send in any proposal? I didn't DM anyone to propose any business deals. Everything just came from serving top leaders in industries like sales, finance, law, and education, to working with subsidiaries of the Alibaba Group, scaling my business into China as well. Everything came like the natural ripple effect, right? Where all I did was just allow my rock to fall in the water, and the ripples just happened naturally. So that was what inspired the ripple effect method.
And how is that helping others now also making waves in their respective fields?
Yeah, so my career of choice is in personal branding, and I do believe that when you realize how big of a rock you just are, right,
Mm.
the way you are offline and online will send a
Oh
natural
yeah.
ripple effects along. And we're talking about today, we're in this world where we are hyping up the storytelling framework, the listicles to educate people, to create content strategies to get leads. And sure, I do have that, right? But a big part of what I teach in the ripple effect is about how do you work on you understanding your value and confronting you with your value, right? I think people tend to connect with their weaknesses sometimes way more than they do with their strengths, and
For
they can be
sure.
very uncomfortable being confronted with their strengths. So there are times where metaphorically I would slam my coaches against the wall, elbow to their necks, right, and put a mirror in front of their face, and for the first time they are forced to see the greatness before them. And when that happens, how they speak changes, how they write changes, the words somehow 10x in its conviction power, right? And then we use the social media strategies to amplify the voice out there, right? So the ripple effect method is not about social media tactics that somehow gets you into the attention game, the visibility pie, right? That will happen, right? But it's about you giving yourself a chance, right? Before, so in order for everyone else to give you a chance, right? So a lot of my coaches, they already are high flyers. They are people who are great in getting the sales done. When they
Yep.
come to me, it's for two reasons. Either it's to move from slogging methodology of sales, of chasing, and they can chase really well, to shift to a more gravitational strategy, right, while maintaining their income and scaling beyond. The other group are of people who already have the income. They don't need it anymore. It's really about how do they scale their influence, their voice. They're thinking of a much more longer term impact, and they find that about clarifying their narrative, their conviction is worth it, because in the long run they want to be that voice where when they speak, right, it moves millions of people.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's great. That's fantastic to hear that. It was such an impact. Have you experienced, or what is the one most rewarding moment in your journey as a brand coach, where you realize the impact you're making on your clients is so tremendous? Like, is there one particular point or experience that you could share?
There are two particular points that immediately come to mind. The first is with a client, and he's in an industry that is heavily shunned by society, the insurance market. And I think in many ways I relate a lot to insurance advisors, because in many ways I was shunned by people. I was overlooked by people. I knew I could help people, but people couldn't care less about my value, right?
Mm.
And I think many advisors find themselves in this situation, no matter how good or great they are. Right? So this is one guy. His name is Andy, great friend of mine today. He is been in the industry back then for about 10 years already. He got his MDR, the Million Dollar Round Table, which is an award by the industry, for 7 consecutive years. So he's by no means uh, a noob or a small fry. He is a well-established advisor, giving very good, high-quality, long-term value advice. He's moved way past beyond that product pushing phase years and years ago, right? And he came to me, wanting to serve the more affluent, high net worth market, to reposition himself. And for some reason, he struggled to do that, right? And he came to me saying, Caleb, saying one day, "Hey, Caleb, I I want to serve this group of people. I have a philosophy that is very dear to me." So I said, "What is this philosophy?" He said, "This philosophy is so dear to me because it was given to me by a pastor who is my mentor." Right. So there's a religious context to it now, right? He says live simply so others can simply live, right? And I always believe that this is the fundamentals of stewardship. How do we steward our money well, right? And how do we steward our money so that we can be a shining light for people around us? Live simply so others can simply live. And it's a beautiful philosophy to live by. Unfortunately, when you want to serve the high net worth affluent crowd, try telling them that your philosophy is to live simply so others can simply live. There is no way on earth that someone who has worked so hard, built in that 6, 7 figure, 8 figure net worth, just to live simply so others can simply live. So I did tell him that if you want to embrace this philosophy, by all means, right? If it's dear to you, then please honor what is dear to you. However, this is in conflict with the mindset of the affluent and high net worth crowd. So he said, Caleb, then how? So I threw it back to him. So I'll say, Andy, I would like you to repeat this same philosophy, but replace the word simply with abundantly. So cautiously, he thought about the sentence and he slowly repeated it. And he said, live abundantly so others can abundantly live. And then he went silent for a good 30 seconds. Yeah, his eyes widened. His pupils, his irises were wide open, and you could see his hair stand for the first time, right? And then it's when he realized that his ideology, which was well intentioned, had been keeping him from serving great people to achieve great things because he was so focused on stewarding your little to help to help others just barely survive, right? And the moment this new ideology kicked in, within 2 months, he started serving the affluent, high net worth, and even ultra high net worth market within just 2 months. We didn't have any marketing strategies to approach that.
Yeah.
This simple shift opened up the doors for him. Within that year, what took him 10 years to build a $5 million AUM of funds for his clients, he doubled it within the year. Just like that. And that was the power of when you have an identity shift, right? You see that ripple effect naturally, a different ripple effect naturally occur. So that's the first incident. The second incident is a bit closer to home. It ties back to actually my own personal experience about my move to KL. I think being in KL, I teach a lot about identity, about being sure about your self-esteem. And for me, I had to overcome a lot of self-esteem issues in order to become the brand culture coach's top leaders. So that was my own journey of growth. But sometimes when you grow to a certain stage, it's very easy to be very comfortable in that new identity, the brand coach who people gravitate towards, leaders seek his opinion. This is his income level, driving that sports, that E-Class coupe, in Singapore. It is very easy to now get comfortable in this identity called the brand coach, because the identity, the brand coach, got me authority, influence, got me reverence to some extent, right? And without trying, things just happen. I think moving to KL was what revealed the next stage of growth for me. And it's only when I felt disillusioned in KL, having too much free time, people not giving a crap about who I am. That's when I realized that I got too attached to the identity called Caleb the Brain Coach. And when you remove that identity altogether, I am naked once again. And it was my journey in KL that I was forced to ask myself, if you remove Caleb the Brain Coach identity from me, am I still valuable? Am I still valuable? And gosh, it took me a long time to have the answer, to have the question answered. It was only 5 months in when I got sick and tired of trying to tell people how great I am, in networking sessions. I am Caleb from so and so. These are my clients. I'm a very good brand coach in Singapore, and I hated that. I told myself, you know what? Let's forget about Caleb, the brand coach. let's remove this and let's find out in what other ways am I valuable. And I will say when I found out how to when I recognized a new identity, that was what sparked a whole new change in my time in KL that got me a chance to speak in the Asia School of Business on personal branding. It got me to speak at a Mini Cooper event. I got me to speak at a Mercedes event as well, right? And built my network and gradually built my network of somehow a ton of LinkedIn Malaysian influencers, right? And the turning point was when I went to networking events, and instead of the whole usual, hi, I'm Caleb, I help so and so achieve X and Y, I am a brand coach who's great in Singapore, I just did this. Hi, I'm Caleb, I'm a Singaporean, and just a few months ago, my wife and I, we sold our house and our car, and we moved to KL together. That was all I did.
Mm.
And once I did that, they went, what? Why? What do you do, Caleb? Why do your wife move to KL? Why would you move to KL for? Right? And then that's when they got interested in me as a person. So I think this period gave me why it was so crucial to me, because it made me realize really where my identity really lies, right?
Mm.
There is the Caleb the brand coach part, and that is a part I must honor and I will honor. But one thing that I had to remember is to honor the other identities that make me me, right? Because that is the me that people are still going to be interested in no matter what. And once I realized that, I would say life got really better, and not just in KL, but even in Singapore as well.
Yeah. No, I think that resonates so well with me because I was in corporate for 14 years. Very different from your experience. I was like climbing up the corporate ladder. I was expatriated from Germany to Hong Kong, and I was on a track of a VP track, right? But then I decided, I mean, lots of course, reasons behind it. But then I eventually decided to leave corporate life, my corporate comfort zone. And then, at one of the first events, one of the first networking events, I was also thinking, would people actually want to still talk to me if they don't see that Shell logo on my business card, right? Like, who am I? Like, am I
and the Shell logo works. It works.
Like, who am I? And I have this, my own little business, solopreneur. And it's definitely a huge challenge. But I think that's also something that helps us to grow and to realize, hopefully, that for those of you who are listening, that you're realizing that you are more than just the company, more than just your brand, right? And then I believe personal brands, they also evolve.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my personal brand in corporate was definitely very different from my personal brand right now. And so speaking of personal brand, what is one small thing? Like, what is we don't need to have like the whole, the whole recipe of how to build our personal brand, but what is one small thing that anyone can start doing today to create their own positive ripple effects in life or even in business?
Yeah. So my answer is going to cut through the noise that we are seeing a lot about what personal branding is today. And I think so personal branding has reached a saturation point where its definition has been so diluted, no one really knows what it means anymore. So my answer to that is about something that beyond tactics, social media strategies, how you introduce yourself. To me, personal branding is simply the art and developing a serious addiction to understanding yourself. And once you understand that, you would have no problem in putting yourself out there, online and offline. But it requires an addiction to understanding yourself for objectively and for what you see.
I think that's really great advice. And such an inspiring conversation with you today, Caleb. So from your journey of reinvention in Malaysia and also your honest reflections on supporting your wife's career and navigating your own path. So Caleb, you've shared so much wisdom about resilience, humility, and also the power of showing up authentically. So Caleb's insights on personal branding, building influence organically, and creating a ripple effect in life and business. were not only eye-opening for me, but also so practical for anyone looking to make a meaningful impact. So let's not forget Caleb's thoughts on being also a male ally, making sure that you have your own goal in mind without then having that resentment build up towards your spouse. And it's also reminding us all how important it is to support one another, both personally and professionally. So to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Thriving Misfits podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Until the next time, remember, your uniqueness is your strength. So make sure you also leverage on your strengths, not only focusing on your weaknesses. Stay bold, stay true, and keep thriving, Misfits.